Iconic, The Economy of Certainty, An Introduction to the Typology of Islamic Legal Theory by Aron Zysow, Harvard University, 1984, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Chapter 1. Title: The Classification of Concurrent Knowledge. A much discussed problem among the usulis is the precise degree of knowledge produced by a mutawatir report. Three positions are to be noted. One denied that the mutawatir report produced certainty. This view is attributed on the one hand to two non-Islamic sects, the Summaniyya and the Barahima, the archetypic deniers of prophecy, and on the other hand to the very famous Mu'tazilite an-Nadham, also pronounced Nazam, who dies 231 to 846. So 231 Islamic, 846 commensurate date in the Common Era, and he was deemed one of his infamies, fada'ih. The other two positions recognize tawatur knowledge as certain, but differ as to whether it is daruri or muqtasab, that is, immediate or acquired. The common classification of knowledge among the Hanafis recognizes two categories of knowledge proper: certainty, yaqeen, in its two varieties of daruri and muqtasab, and confidence, tumanina, in which the balance is entirely in favor of truthfulness. Opposed to these is the mere presumption, dhann, of truthfulness. Basing themselves upon this identification or classification, some of the sources distinguish between the view of the Summaniyya and the Barahima and of an-Nadham. The non-Muslims accorded tawatur from information the status of a presumption. Nadham thought that it inspired confidence. Yet the difference is not regarded as one of major significance. For to deny tawatur as a source of certainty is to deny the Quran is of certain authenticity. It would introduce doubt as to our knowledge of history, of geography, and even our own place in the world, the identity of our parents, the foods we may safely enjoy, and those that threaten our life. The majority of jurists and theologians, writes Samarkandi, hold that the mutawatir report imposes certainty by itself without external evidence. The Mu'tazili Nadham held that it does not impose certainty by itself, but only with external evidence. Equally, the unit report can impose certainty with external evidence. An example of this is the report that someone has died. When there is a crowd at his door, the sound of weeping is heard, and a bier appears, this report imposes certainty. Nadham argued against the infallibility of the mutawatir report by noting that if each person was individually capable of lying, his view of human nature was pessimistic in this connection. This fact was not altered by their mere coming together, ijtima'. This is the same argument Nadham used in attacking the doctrine of consensus. Nadham illustrated his contention by mutawatir reports which were known to be false, such as that of the Jews concerning the crucifixion of Jesus, and those of the Zoroastrians concerning the miracles of their prophet. We know from the Quran that Jesus was not really crucified, and we know that Zoroaster was no prophet because his dualist doctrine is false. What is obscure about Nadham's teaching is how he dealt with the authenticity of the Quran. Did he claim the existence of external evidence, or did he bypass the tawatur issue entirely? This question is all the more intriguing in that a Hanafi jurist of considerable repute, the Mu'tazili Muhammad ibn Shuja' al-Thalji, died 266, is reported to have followed Nadham's teaching. Those who took the orthodox position that tawatur knowledge is certain were divided as to whether it was daruri or muqtasab. Daruri knowledge is immediate in the sense that it does not rest upon a chain of inference. It is knowledge which forces itself upon one, hence its etymology, and it is thus immune to doubt. It has both an internal and an external aspect. It includes the perception of pain, the axioms of thought, and sensory knowledge. Because the knowledge we obtain through our senses is daruri, it is evident why the traditional view considered tawatur knowledge to be daruri. To hear a mutawatir tradition is, in effect, to come into direct contact with the Prophet. To hear his words or see his actions, the opposing doctrine that his knowledge is muqtasab goes back to Bishr al-Mu'tamar, who dies in 210, commensurate with 825, the founder of the Baghdadi school of the Mu'tazila. It is often linked with the name of Abu al-Qasim al-Ka'bi, dies 319-931, an adherent of this school. Ka'bi was a Hanafi, and his teaching in Central Asia elicited a refutation on the part of al-Maturidi. In time, the Muqtasab position came to acquire important adherents of various persuasions. The Imami Sheikh al-Mufid, who dies in 413-1023, the Shafi Abu Bakr al-Daqqaq, who dies in 392-1002, and Imam al-Haramain Juwayni, who dies 478-1088. The Basran Mu'tazili Abu al-Hussein al-Basri, who dies in 436-1045. Indeed, we even find Sarkhasi identifying it as that of the Shafi'is without qualification. Abu al-Hussein al-Basri presents the standard argument for his position in justifying the rejection of the view of his predecessors, Abu Ali al-Jubai and Abu Hashim and Abdul Jabbar. Quote, inference, istidlal, is the ordering of knowledge to arrive at further knowledge. Everything whose existence depends on the ordering of knowledge is inferred. The knowledge that follows from a mutawatir report occurs in this way, for we know what has been reported to us only when we know what the reporter has not reported on the basis of his opinion, but not reported on the basis of his opinion, but on the basis of what is at all doubtful, and that there is no motive for him to lie. Thus we know that he has not lied intentionally because we know that he has no motive for lying, and we know that the report cannot be unintentionally false because we know that it is a matter of clarity with no doubt. Once its being false is excluded, it follows that it is true. When one of these conditions is not met, we do not know the soundness of the report. End of quote. Qa'abi is reported to have argued that if it were possible to know what is absent from the senses immediately, then it would be possible to have sensory knowledge by inference. Since the latter is impossible, so is the former. The account of Tawatur knowledge was, however, faced with several glaring anomalies. It seemed to take place unconsciously, without the usual chain of reasoning. Adolescents and the common people had knowledge of this sort, and they were not considered capable of inference. It appeared to have the immunity to arguments, specious arguments, which were characteristic of Daruri knowledge. How could it depend upon knowledge of the attributes of the reporters when the latter was so obscure and a subtle topic that it was beyond many mature rational men, even theologians? The nature of Tawatur knowledge was then of a peculiar sort, as Ghazali illustrates. While preferring the label Daruri, he grasped the difficulties of the question and was prepared to call the dispute a purely verbal one. This position is already outlined in his treatise Al-Mankhul and developed in Al-Mustasfa. Later Ash'arites, for example Fakhruddin Razi, himself a supporter of the Daruri view, saw Ghazali as an adherent of iktisab. Apologies for these terms, no Arabic given. This in turn brought others to Ghazali's defense. Especially interesting is the fact that among those who supported iktisab, we find a rehabilitation of the former heretics. Abu Hussein al-Basri already suggests that Nadam's stipulation of external circumstances may be identified with the usual conditions for Tawatur, and in the Burhan of Imam al-Haramain Juwayni, the position of the Sumaniya and Barahima is boldly reinterpreted in a similar fashion. Among the Hanafis, however, the Daruri position was firmly maintained. The Hanafis could and did claim that this knowledge, being Daruri, needs no arguments. Assertion was enough. But they were quite ready to borrow and elaborate upon Mu'tazili arguments for the certainty of Tawatur knowledge. Thus, Samarqandi offers an especially elegant proof, showing that the usual motives for lying are not applicable in a sufficiently large group, including people of all classes. The pressure, for example, to which weak and poor can be subjected can safely be ruled out in the case of the powerful and the wealthy. Stay tuned for many more parts.